if the government is ditching these proposals to bring in a 50% discount system where those who plead guilty early can get half the time off their sentence, where is the money to come from that policy was meant to save? Now, we understand at the BBC that the Ministry of Justice will not be expected to make that saving, £100 million or so this year. They may be allowed to delay that particular saving until 2014 or so. But this whole package of just exactly what's going on in the legal system is not just about this discounting system. It's also about cuts to legal aid. It's also about new sentences for those who carry knives in England and Wales. So there's a whole range of things, not just the narrow row that erupted over Ken Clarke's comments about the potential for sentencing for rapists. There's also, of course, as ever right now, the issue of exactly what's going on in the UK economy. As I said, the Prime Minister hasn't had one of these press conferences for quite some time now, so I expect that he will face some questions. Public sector borrowing figures out this morning, for example, still suggest that the UK will be borrowing more than they had expected to when the coalition was formed last year. In fact, tomorrow is the anniversary of the coalition's emergency budget, as they termed it. So there may well be lots of journalists with birthday questions for the Prime Minister. OK,
and just on the strength or weakness of the coalition at the moment, I mean, where do you assess we are in terms of David Cameron and Nick Clegg? I mean, a crude caricature might be that on sentencing, David Cameron's given in to the right, to the Tory right, on the health reforms he gave in to the left, to the Liberal Democrats. But where are we with the coalition, do you think?
Well, I think there's a bit of truth in that characterisation there. But however, the picture is nearly always a bit more complex than that. But also, what's interesting about the sentencing row is Nick Clegg was sort of brought in to be ballast for Ken Clarke, because the Liberal Democrats have an awful lot of sympathy with what he was planning. The Prime Minister is now walking in. Let's go straight in and hear what he's got to say.
Proud day for me. I'm looking forward to welcoming Her Majesty the Queen and His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, to Downing Street for a lunch to celebrate the Duke's 90th birthday today. I know everyone in the room will want to send him their very best wishes and to pay tribute to the decades of service that he's given to our country. This morning I want to explain how we're reforming the broken criminal justice system to fight crime and improve punishment. Before I go into details, let me just put this in context. I want to make one thing very clear. My mission is to make sure that families can feel safe in their homes and they can walk the streets freely and without fear. Our policies are about making sure that is the case. We want the police to focus on local people's concerns and priorities, so we're going to make them accountable to the public. And we want prisons to be places of punishment with a purpose. So instead of prisoners sitting in their cells, we will require them to work hard and reform themselves. The system today is failing and badly needs reform. Each prison place costs nearly £45,000 a year, but half of prisoners reoffend within a year of leaving. Half of them are on drugs. Over 10% are foreigners, many of whom shouldn't be here at all. And prisoners are often in their cells for 23 hours a day, not doing anything valuable or anything to reform themselves. So we inherited a hugely expensive system that doesn't work. Let me be clear. We will always pay the costs necessary to protect the public and to punish criminals. And we will not reduce the prison population by cutting prison sentences. We must do it by making prison work. For me, there should be three clear principles. First, our whole approach needs to be built around the recognition that the first duty of government is to protect the public and ensure that those who play by the rules are kept safe. Second, serious and dangerous offenders must go to jail and stay there for a long time. While community sentences must be clearly punitive, making greater use of elements such as curfews and travel bans. And we must be tougher on confiscating the assets of criminals as well. Third, breaking the cycle of reoffending needs to be right at the heart of the criminal justice system. This requires a completely new approach. It means a much tougher view of prison as a real place of punishment and reform, with a proper focus on addressing the causes of offending, so when prisoners are released, they are much less likely to offend again. And it means those who run prisons or community sentences should be paid according to their success in reducing reoffending at every stage of the criminal justice system, from sentences in the community to to prisons and probation. Anyone who thinks that action to reduce reoffending is somehow going soft on crime could not be more wrong. Whether people feel safe on the streets is a direct result of how good we are at stopping reoffending. And whether it's safe to let serious offenders out of prison will depend crucially on how good we are at addressing their potential to reoffend, protecting the public, properly punishing serious offenders and cutting reoffending. That is how we plan to transform the criminal justice system. The legislative proposals that Ken Clarke is setting out today are one part of that approach. They include a tough package to fight crime, putting the system on the side of the victim. So first, tough action on knife crime, which has been the cause of so many tragedies in our communities. Even after all these tragedies, far too many people still think they can go out armed with a knife. We need to send the clearest possible message that this simply has to change. So we will introduce for the first time in legislation a compulsory jail term for anyone threatening someone with a knife. Second, anyone who's had squatters in their property will know how incredibly difficult it is to get them out. So we are proposing, and will briefly consult on, a criminal offence of squatting to be introduced in this forthcoming bill. Third, the public have rightly been outraged by some prosecutions of homeowners defending their property from criminals. So we'll put beyond doubt that homeowners and small shopkeepers who use reasonable force to defend themselves or their properties will not be prosecuted. Alongside the bill, we're publishing our response to the consultation on sentencing, which we published last December. Discounts for early guilty pleas have been part of the criminal justice system for some time, and it's quite right that this should be so. They can help to speed up justice and can mean that victims do not have to relive their ordeal in the courtroom. In the Green Paper, we consulted on a proposal to increase the current discount available for an early guilty plea at the earliest possible stage to 50%. For the most serious crimes, we've concluded this would certainly not be right. The sentence served would depart far too much from the sentence handed down by the judge, and this is simply not acceptable. We also looked at whether the 50% discount could only be applied to less serious crimes. But again, we reached the same conclusion. The sentence would be too lenient, the wrong message would be sent out to the criminal, and it would erode public confidence in the system. What's more, in reaching our conclusions, we considered the strong views expressed by serious people working in the criminal justice system that 50% was just too high, and that we needed to find better ways of speeding up the process for victims and witnesses, and for the police and the courts. So there will be no change to the current position on early guilty pleas for any category of case. The money that would have been saved through this proposal will be saved through greater efficiency in other parts of the Ministry of Justice budget. The consultation also raised significant concerns about the effectiveness of indeterminate sentences, so-called IPPs, introduced by the last government. We have inherited a system that is unclear, inconsistent and uncertain. Unclear because actually a large proportion of the public don't really know what indeterminate sentences are or how they work. Inconsistent because they can mean that two people who commit the same crime can end up getting very different punishments. And uncertain because victims and their families don't have any certainty about the sentence that will be served or when their assailants will be let out. So we're going to review the existing system urgently with a view to replacing it with an alternative that is clear, tough, and better understood by the public. Let me set out what this alternative would involve. First, there will be a greater number of life sentences, including mandatory life sentences for the most serious repeat offenders. I think life sentences are well understood and liked by the public. Second, instead of serious sexual and violent offenders being released halfway through their sentence, we propose they should spend at least 2/3 of that sentence in prison, and that such offenders should never again be released early without the parole board being satisfied that it's safe to let this happen. Third, we also propose there should be compulsory programs for dangerous offenders while they're in prison to make them change their ways and not commit more crimes when they are eventually released. And we will re-examine the parole board arrangements for the rehabilitation of those with indeterminate sentences to ensure that real work is done to reform offenders while they're in prison. Now, the review I'm announcing today will assess these changes and consider how such a new sentencing framework would allow us to replace the existing regime. We'll come forward with legislation in the autumn. In the meantime, indeterminate sentences will continue to be available to the courts as they are now. And let me be clear, the changes we propose will need to maintain or strengthen the protection of the public so they can have full confidence in the system. This is a non-negotiable red line for me and for this government. The public need to know that dangerous criminals will be locked up for a very long time. I'm determined that they will be. Before I take your questions, let me just say this. I've always believed the following. In a civilized society, people give up their right to seek vengeance or act violently when they are done wrong to, in return to protection from the state. And if this order is to be maintained, it is absolutely vital that the public have confidence in the system the state puts in place. Public confidence isn't a side issue in this debate, it is the issue. And that's what our reforms are about, returning confidence to the system, making sure the police answer to the public's priorities, making sure justice is done and seen to be done, and making sure offenders are reformed so we do everything possible to cut the levels of crime and reoffending in our country. Thank you for listening. Very happy to take some questions. Let's start with Joey Jones from Sky.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. You may feel that it's terrific to be a government that consults and listens and all the rest of it, but presumably you'd like sometimes to get it right first time. I mean, your administration has made a series of unforced errors on issues that people really care about. Do you bear some responsibility for that?
Well, I bear responsibility for everything the government does. That is what the Prime Minister does. But I don't really accept what lies behind your question. We've produced a consultation paper, a green paper, on sentencing. We've listened to views about it, and we've now come up with a very tough and robust set of changes to the criminal justice system. But I think people looking at this government more broadly, even our harshest critics, I think, would say this government has an incredibly clear view about what is necessary in terms of reducing the deficit, getting the economy going, getting Britain back on track, bold and long-standing reforms to things like public sector pensions and public sector pay, hugely radical programme in terms of reforming welfare, areas that previous governments haven't touched, hugely bold reforms to education, where we've already created more academy schools in 12 months than the last government did in 12 years. So I don't really accept the idea that this government isn't extremely strong, resolute and determined. It is, it's seen as such, and it will go on being seen like that. But I think it's right when you're making policies and when you're delivering changes, if you consult, if you listen, if you think you can improve on your plans, the weak thing to do is just to keep ploughing on and say, well, I can't possibly change because I might have a difficult time at a press conference. The tough, strong thing to do is say, yes, we can make these plans better. Well, let's do that. And that's exactly what we've done in this case. I think a much more robust set of plans that are in the Green Paper. And it's also what we did in the case of the Health Service, where I think it was right to get back on board the reform of the NHS, a whole series of people who ought to support reform, who work in the NHS, who support the NHS, and that's what we've done. Absolutely the right thing, and I don't for one minute think that somehow it is weak to listen and then to act. It's a sign of strength and confidence. James Landau from the BBC.
Prime Minister, why did you get the sentencing policy so wrong in the first place? Or is it all Ken Clarke's fault?
No, the whole government produced a green paper, and a green paper with ideas in it for trying to reform a broken system. And I think you do have to sort of stand back and say, well, what are we dealing with here? We're dealing here with a prison system where each place costs £45,000. Half of all prisoners reoffend within a year. Half of them are on drugs. 10% are foreigners. And a court system that doesn't work very well, where you do have 10,000 cases getting to court where at the last minute the offender pleads guilty. So there's all sorts of inefficiencies and bad arrangements in the system that we need to change. The Green Paper was about trying to address some of those. The idea of a greater sentence discount was right to put that forward, to see whether that might bring forward more early guilty pleas. But I think the proof during the process of consultation was that actually the 50% reduction was far too much about cutting the level of sentencing rather than speeding up the court process. So as an idea, it failed, and it rightly failed, and wasn't just condemned by a number of victims, but also a number of people involved in sentencing, including judges, didn't think it was the right approach. So the right thing for the government to do is say, right, OK, we're not going to go ahead with that. We will actually save the money in a different way. We'll press ahead with trying to make sure the court processes work better. And we'll also produce a range of measures that will actually mean we get a tougher response to crime. I think that's the right thing to do. And there'd be no point in having... Why would you have green papers or white papers if you never listened to what anything anybody said after you'd published them? So I think we've gone through a good process. I think we now have a good set of reforms, and we can take those forward in the bill published today.
But was it the judges that changed your mind, or the papers?
No, what changed my mind was actually looking at the figures that showed that too much of the reduction in terms of the 50%, that was really about reducing sentences, including sentences for some dangerous offenders, rather than speeding up the court process. And if you like, I think the real clarification that comes through what I'm saying today, compared with where we were in the Green Paper, is I think as a country we have got to cut the growing costs of the prison system. We've got to stop this massive acceleration in prisoner numbers. But the right way to do that is to reform prison and make it work better, not to cut sentences, particularly sentences for dangerous offenders. So that's a very clear statement about what the government wants to do. And we've arrived at that through a good process, publishing proposals, listening to what people have to say, and then coming to a conclusion as a government. And I think that's, funnily enough, what governments ought to do. Chris Shipp, ITV.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I hear what you say, that you were consulting, but Ken Clarke clearly told the Commons that this policy was likely to survive. Therefore, do you not agree, you turning too often, caving in the face of some bad newspaper headlines, is a sign of weak government, indecisive government, and the public will well take that conclusion from all this?
Well, I don't accept that for a moment. I think if you look at what this government is doing in terms of a very bold multi-year plan to reduce the deficit, if you look at what the government is doing in terms of reforming long-term problems that the country faces, like the cost of public sector pensions, if you look at the very swift action we took reducing the budget deficit in 2010, look at the welfare reforms going through Parliament. Look at what we're doing, expanding the number of academies. Look at what we're doing at reforming the criminal justice system. People's criticism of this government, actually, when you go out on the streets, is very often you're trying to do too many things, you're trying to do them too quickly, or you're too obsessed by the deficit. Actually, people don't tend to come up to me and talk about U-turns. They talk about you're taking on a lot. We are taking on a lot. We need to as a government. But I don't make any apology for listening as you go along and making sure you're getting things right. And where you can improve them and where you can make them better, as I say, it's a sign of strength to say, I'm going to make this better. I'm going to make that change. I don't mind if people say, well, that's not what you originally proposed, or you've made a change. Being strong is about being prepared to admit you didn't get everything right the first time, but you're going to improve it and make it better. And that's exactly what we're doing with this. And I think that's the right process to follow. I mean, if you think of putting it the other way round, if you heard of a way to make your policy better, but you did nothing about it, that's not strength, that's not leadership. That is actually living in fear of being criticised. You must never do that. Andy Bell, Channel 5.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Andy Bell, 5 News. Is a lesson that you're taking from the experience of the last few months, when you've looked again at these policies, that essentially you have given your members of your cabinet too much freedom and you need to be more on top of what's happening inside your government? Is that a conclusion you're drawing?
No, I don't think it's that so much. I think the way I put it is this: if you remember what this government sort of inherited and what we had to do, as we came into office, we needed to put in place very rapid deficit reduction measures and cost savings right across Whitehall. We had to make a number of very difficult decisions and very difficult calls right at the beginning, and I'm absolutely convinced that was the right thing to do. You look at your television screens today, you see what is happening in a country like Greece. The reason that we've got such low interest rates and we have economic confidence in Britain's plans to pay its way out of debt is because we took those steps. Now, inevitably, when you take that many steps that quickly, you're building up for yourself a whole series of things you've got to do. Reforming legal aid over here, making the police more efficient over there, making sure that local government can deliver more for less. We've set ourselves a huge number of challenges. And I think the impressive thing is we're meeting those challenges. But as we go along, we need to make sure we're meeting them absolutely in the right way. Now, the money that won't be saved from the sentencing reform, £130 million, we will be able to save in other parts of the the Ministry of Justice, not least because it's an £8 billion budget and we have a 4-year programme of savings in that budget. And that's the right thing to do. So, of course, you know, if you're trying to do as many things as this government, because of the economic situation you inherited, you're always going to have a series of difficult policy choices as you go forward. The question, I think, is do you make the right choices? And I think today is another example where we've made the right choice. Let's make sure our system is more affordable by reforming prison and making it work better, not by cutting sentences to dangerous and violent offenders. That would be the wrong thing to do, and we are making the right decision. Talk Sport.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister Sean Dilley from UTV and Talk Sport. 2 questions on protection. Really important point you made on reasonable force defending your home and property. How is that different to the law as it is at the moment? Because we currently have reasonable force, also on personal protection. Last Tuesday, that oaf of a consultant disrespected, to my mind, the Office of Prime Minister. What on earth was he thinking? I know you cannot criticise his professionalism, but will you tell us that he was ultimately professional? And if you don't, we'll draw our own conclusions.
Firstly, on reasonable force, what the law will do will put beyond doubt not just the issue of reasonable force, but reasonable force in defending your home or your premises. That is what is new and being put into the law properly for the first time. As for the consultant, I mean, I've been visiting hospitals for a few years, and this was the first time this had happened. But obviously, for some reason, the consultant hadn't been told a visit was taking place, and he was quite fairly concerned about levels of hygiene, not amongst the politicians. We'd all wiped our hands and rolled up our sleeves. I think he was a bit more worried about some of the people who were filming us and whether they were. He was, and no, it wasn't. It was. The great thing was I turned to there was the patient, who was a charming man, and his daughter was there. And I turned to the daughter and said, "I'm very sorry about this. It's never happened before." And she said, "Oh, I thought that was all part of the act." She thought this was, we'd laid on some exquisite drama, including a consultant in a bow tie in a state of high excitement. Anyway, it certainly brightened up the day. And when I was told that the broadcasting networks weren't going to show this footage, I believed that for precisely 50 seconds before I knew that temptation would overcome you, and it was quite amusing in its own way. Ronan Watson from The Times.
Part in your efforts to stop reoffending. Have you explicitly agreed that none of the extra cuts will hit the probation service, or will they be included in the search for savings?
No, we haven't made that agreement. I mean, obviously, the probation service is a part of the Ministry of Justice's bill. The proposed efficiencies in the probation service are less at the moment than the efficiencies we're making, for instance, to the police service. But as I say, there's a £8 billion budget that the Ministry of Justice have. And I think if you're looking for what has actually changed in this, I think the key change is this, that we want to make savings through making the services, including prison, more efficient and more effective, and cut reoffending rates. We are not going to save money by cutting sentences. That is the key change that comes out of this consultation and this process. And I think it's a very important thing, and I think the public will be right behind that. They know that prison could be more efficient and effective. They know that the police do a fantastic job, but actually there are efficiencies we can make in terms of making sure civilians are doing jobs that frontline officers should be out on the streets and all the rest of it. They understand those points, and I want to take the public with us as we go through this process of making our services more efficient. But we're not proposing to save money by cutting prison sentences. That's the key point. Michael Crick from Newsnight.
But several of the things you've announced this morning, Prime Minister, are going to add to the Ministry of Justice's costs. The mandatory sentences for threatening with a knife, for instance, the decision to no longer allow 50% remission for violence and sexual offenders. That will add to the costs, in addition to the savings from efficiencies that you've told Ken Clarke to go and find to cover the 50% discount scheme. I mean, isn't this a huge kick in the teeth for a minister who came along, gave you a very generous settlement at a very early stage in the spending round, and now you've made him go away and find more savings?
No, I mean, Ken and I have had very good discussions about this. We had a very good discussion at Cabinet this morning. Ken knows more than many ministers about how possible it is to reform public services and get value for money. That's exactly what he's doing in his department. I mean, for instance, there was the recent market testing of one prison on the prison estate, and the savings that can be had from that, even if actually the existing operator continues to run it, can yield very great savings for his department. Ken is happy with the proposals that we're both publishing this morning and that he'll be explaining to the House of Commons this afternoon as the right way forward. And as I say, it's an £8 billion budget, and it's possible to make these savings without cutting the sentences, particularly for the most dangerous offenders. Well, you'll see in the bill that's published, there's big plans for reducing the cost of legal aid. We do have the most generous system anywhere in the world for legal aid in the United Kingdom, and I think it's right that we make these savings. We're not proposing further savings on top of what has already been announced, but there are large other parts of the budget that Ken will be addressing. Graham.
Graham Wilson from The Sun. A couple of questions. Damalula Taylor's father, Richard Taylor, has this morning asked for you to sack Ken Clarke. He said, Ken Clarke does not know what is going on in the streets. He does not know what criminality is about. What is your message to him? And secondly, have you now dropped your manifesto commitment to imprison anyone who commits a knife offence?
Well, first of all, on the knife crime, I think this is a good measure. I think what I've always wanted to see is greater certainty and a clear message sent out about knife crime. And I think this proposal that anyone caught threatening someone with a knife goes to prison, a mandatory sentence, I think is a really helpful step forward. Because that is, I think the criminal justice system does have a role in sending these sorts of signals. So I think that is a step forward. It's better than the status quo. It's an improvement. Of course, one would often like to do more in these things, but I think it is a very good step forward for the system and for having safe and peaceful streets and sending that message out, particularly to young people and to gangs. As for what Richard, I have every respect for Richard Taylor, a man I've met with several times. Everyone knows not just how he suffered as a father, but also how much he has put back into wanting to make Britain a safer and better place, and I have huge respect for him. I don't agree with him about Ken Clarke. I think Ken is an extremely effective minister. He's a very tough Secretary of State who's got a hugely difficult job to do in trying to deliver more for less through his department. He's making great steps forward to do that. Like me, he's quite robust and prepared enough to put forward proposals, to listen to what people say, and then to come up with something better. I think that is a strength in politics, not a weakness, and it's certainly something that Ken has no problems doing.